Okay, so I got a couple of things. One is, love what's this week has been wonderful. My first time I've been here, definitely be coming again. I've for years been coming to the CGF gathering, which I love as well, which makes it more difficult because I'm going to want to go to both. But right now, working, and Dottie couldn't even get off for this week, let alone 2 weeks. But the spirit here is wonderful. Just was really blessed. And this, it goes to show that you can have unity. We have 3 fellowships here, so to speak, human fellowships. I say it that way because we're one body, and we're clearly one body. And to me, the biggest factor, I've been involved or interacting with unity issues because I grew up in a house where my dad was on the Continental Committee back in the 60s, so for many years. And I think there's really one thing, and that's fear. If you have love, you don't have fear. And so if you have love and you do away with fear, you can do anything. And I don't. Did anyone read the book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Oh, yeah.
So
right.
That's a great book. And there's another one about the ice is melting. It's really simple, actually. It's human nature. And we have to overcome, and that's what we all have to do, right, is overcome or try to overcome human nature. But if we had true love, then there would be no fear, and it wouldn't be, to me, and it's that simple. So I have a colleague in Japan who says, simple is best. That is his phrase he loves using. And it's so true in life. If you keep it simple, and God, it is simple, it's even the fruit of the Spirit. It's love. I mean, that's the core thing. These are different aspects, in my opinion, different aspects of love, really. So I have I promised you yesterday, and I forgot to do it. So there's this, if you're ever interested, it was a group of Protestants in southern France, I mentioned, the Cathars, C-A-T-H-A-R, Cathar. Really interesting history there, that were persecuted heavily. But and we'll see some of this today. They don't come up, but the Huguenots and the Waldensians and others, I may be pronouncing that a little bit wrong, but there's been many Protestant or protesters, that have come back to the core beliefs since day one, basically. I want to read just something here I found, and you can tell me what this is from. So there's a group, and the movement began in 1767. So that's kind of near the first major awakening, Great Awakening. We come out of the groups here come out of the second Great Awakening, which I will describe today. So in a barn in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and there was one person, Audubon University, you know that in Ohio? Well, that's where it's named after. He was a German Reform pastor, and another one was a Mennonite preacher. Let's see here. And then in 1880, the movement was officially organized as the Church of United Brethren in Christ. So why am I saying that church? This is the foundation of this university, actually, is the Church of United Brethren. I believe the same one. I mean, they could be there. Sometimes some of these names are very similar, but it's what I could find given my searching from Manchester University. That's what it was. And if you ever had kids and you looked at schools in the Midwest, there's a ton of schools that were started in the early 1800s, generally started by a religious organization. So like in Michigan, there's Kalamazoo College, which was Baptist. There's Hope College, which is still Dutch Reform. Albion, where my son, my Donnie and my son, our son went, was Methodist, for example. Sarah actually went to school out in California, which was a Catholic. It was originally a Catholic school, but it was all these schools that really wanted to preach, and usually set up as a preaching or creating ministers and others. And they were allowed to go do that. And a lot of them in that early 1800s. Denison, I forget what Denison was, but that was also, I think, just don't remember which denomination that was. But there's a lot out there, and just this country kind of shows what was going on at that time, actually.
Yale and Harvard one also?
Oh, probably, yeah, they're much earlier, and they would have been probably, not Anglican probably, but they're probably some form. And then there's Notre Dame is a good example of one, which is still pretty religious, and I forget which focus of the Catholic Church that is, if I remember correctly. Yeah. All right, so let's get into the ecclesias from Christ through the centuries, and we're going to cover centuries pretty quickly, obviously. My intention is to run over today, but when I tell you, I'm going to, Lord willing, stop reasonably on time. Maybe just start a little bit late. And then I'm going to show a bunch of slides with pictures on it, with a bunch of ecclesias. So if you want to step out at that time, you're certainly welcome to do it. I have a few stories I want to tell during that time, but I know we'll run over some. But hopefully, Lord willing, at least give you 10 minutes before Brother Jim's talk. So this is one of the pictures that was, this one actually shows then the Dome of the Rock, and over to the right, the Golden Gate. And you see more of the tombs that are here. These are all above ground tombs here. It's just crazy. And then again, here's another picture of the Western Wall. So we're going to talk about the 7 churches briefly, very briefly, in Revelations, how they really disintegrated over time. I mean, this is these things always take time. As I said the other day, our organizations from the Second Great Awakening are 170 some years, which is not bad actually, given how many churches evolved much more quickly than that. Then we'll talk about the Great Awakenings. There's 2. We'll focus on the second one. And then I'm going to go from the Christadelphian perspective, Brother Roberts especially, that did a lot of the kind of constructs that we use today and how we, quote, do church. So that will be kind of the final bit. And then after that, I'll share some slides, some that over the years from my father. So some pictures you'll see, and the people, you may be in them, but you were probably a lot younger, for example. And there'll be some newer stuff and combination of things from my dad and from me. So the 7 churches, right, they provide a foundation. We can discuss, are these churches through the ages? Certainly were churches then. They all had different problems, as we know. All are examples for us, right? They all are asked to preserve the faith. They're all given different, saying this is what's good about you, this is what's bad about you. For the most part, they all had something bad. There was criticism. This is a good summary here. And the most notable issue included spiritual indifference. Right, loss of the first love, loss of Christ, and tolerating heresy, allowing error to come in. It's one thing I think what has kept our organizations together is that we have not done that. We have, as I said before, good news is we have no hierarchy, bad news is we have no hierarchy. But ultimately, I believe it's great that we don't, because we have not let error in. Now, does heresy come in every once in a while? Yeah, and we deal with it as ecclesias, perhaps, but very little. Now, we do have a lot of divisions, right, over time, and usually it's personality issues, and that's problematic, and we need to deal with that as well. So, and these 7 churches are all in Asia Minor, or what would today be Turkey. And why Turkey? I think one was, there was a lot of Jewish people in that area, but it was also the crossroads between the Western Roman Empire and the Middle East, and roads, all roads led to Rome. Well, that was very true already by that time, and it was good economic trade. So if you're going to go preach somewhere, where are you going to go preach? Preach where people will listen, and preach where people are. You're not going to keep it under the bushel, so to speak, right, as we know. So it was an important area. And there was also a really easy to travel, safe to travel for the most part, and you can move around. And also the messages, the epistles could be moved around as well. So these 7 churches, I'm sure you know who it is. So some important facts about this area. There's Alexander the Great in Greece, just to the west. They actually controlled that part, really big empire mainly to the east of Greece, or modern day Greece, and set up a number of Greek cities. So these were learned cities where people generally could learn to read and write, and became prosperous trading places for the most part. So you had Greeks, you had Jews, you had Asians, or those from the farther east, which would be called Asian. I'm not sure there was any Chinese or Oriental people at that point, and certainly there was a combination of religions. Obviously, the Greek religion, which is really kind of what the Roman religion took its from. So multiple cultures. So again, here's a way to preach and get it expanded quite rapidly. So certainly the Jewish element was there. Antiochus the Great sent 2,000 Jews families from Babylon to cities in Asia Minor, 2000 BC. I was not aware of that. That's according to history. So again, the seed was planted for those that should have an understanding of what the Messiah, what they were looking for. Plus, there was many others of many different faiths as well. So these were in towns and in Asia Minor, as I mentioned. And in 17 AD, there was a great earthquake that destroyed many of them or damaged them significantly. So Tiberius was the emperor at the time, actually supported the repopulation and the rebuilding of those cities. So they also had a strong tie, not just through religion, potentially the Roman religion, but to the emperor, because they were basically saved, so to speak, by him by the reconstruction of those cities. So it's quite interesting. And some would argue, and I would argue, that there's a way of looking at the churches that we can look at our own churches even today, say which ones do we follow and how do we take this advice ourselves, that matter. So here they are, they're all in Western, what is Turkey today. In Antioch, I mentioned kind of the center ecclesia here where Paul spent some time and then started traveling through these before he ended up going on over to Europe. So remember, this is not Europe, this is actually Asia. It still is Asia, right? And you have, a bridge now and other things between the areas where Constantinople is in that area there. And this is just a quick summary. So, Ephesus, what's the criticism? Love for Christ, no longer fervent in that. Instruction, do the works you did first. Smyrna, be faithful unto death. Pergamos, repent. If you ever get to Berlin, they have the Pergamos temple there. The Germans, the French, the English, Americans to some extent, but not as much, took a lot of stuff from the Middle East and brought it back. The gates of Babylon, all kinds of different things are in different places in Europe primarily. But look at this, Philadelphia, keep the faith. So they had no criticisms. That was the only one that had no criticism. And Smyrna had no criticism. But they all had instructions. Right, so no matter where you are individually or your ecclesia's at from a spiritual standpoint, there's always things to improve. And I think obviously this is like part of a 12-step, right? One of the first things I believe is you have to admit you have a problem. If we don't have a problem, well then you're never going to go try to fix it. So we have to understand that is continuous. And one of the things to think about is, okay, so where do we fit? And we may be at different places in our ecclesias, or the ecclesias may be in different places, but there's probably some element of one or more of these that exist because we're human just like they are, right? We have problems just like they have. There's no doubt. Now, I think if you look at the outside, and I always say this, is that from the outside perspective, I think our communities are better on average, but we're still just as bad, if you understand what I mean by that. So let's look at the evolution from kind of early days of synagogues or a lot of house churches as well, where there was a lot of fellowship going on, especially around meals as well, and bring this kind of closeness of back and forth with one another to the local leaders, to really building out then more connection between the church and state in Rome. You have some of the major milestones in doing this, the Edict of Milan, where you had Christianity that was legalized or recognized as being a legal religion within the empire. You still had the Rome-based empire, and then there's over time that got split into two, East and West, and then you have the Council of Nicene, where they went through the Arian controversy. This is the nature of Christ. So, and this is 325 years later than Christ preached, and again, most of the written books that we have come from more prior to AD 90, I think, roughly, right? I think Revelation's like AD 90. So they're evolving their thinking over the years, quite significantly, I would say. Because I think even the devil comes up even after this, I believe. And then state religion decree was made in AD 38, saying this is now the religion of the empire. Now, by this point, Christianity was more different than the first century than probably some of the pagan beliefs, because a lot of those got inhaled into it, just like the Roman religion inhaled the Greek religion, for that matter. So we have then the setup of the apostasy. And by the way, I don't know if I said this the other day. I know I've told some of the people that one of the signs of the apocalypse is that the Pope is American. I said this to colleagues in Italy, and they like, that's a good point. But what we're leading into really from that is over and over again, people trying to get back to the way it was. So the Protestant movement, right, protester movement, protesting the Roman Catholic authority. It's not just Roman Catholic authority. There's, you have the Eastern Orthodox, and you have, I forget the name of the, basically the Pope for the Russian Orthodox. I think Kroll is still in it, very good friends with Putin, by the way. And how do you control people? Media, through the media, that's the minds, which he's done a good job doing that. And then you control the hearts through religion. And he's done a good job of that as well. And as we probably know, the Pope was somewhat connected with even the Nazi Party at some point. Don't want to upset too many people, I guess. But dissenters, the apostasies, against the apostasies were really important. Some radical reformations, some happened certainly, and then the rationalists continue, which is kind of the reformations that we come out of, which I'll describe a little more detail. So again, first 300 years, Christianity didn't eat typically in homes, we're told historically, or in synagogues, and these were a place where worship took place, but also fuller fellowship, I would say. Following what we've talked about already, the structure of the synagogue and Gord kind of summarized that for us. So kind of grew out, and as the organization became more recognized, it became more popular, became more accessible, but it also began to change. And one of the things that people like to do, we love to do, is define everything. This kind of gets into legalism we've talked about and has been talked about. We try to make everything fit what we think is right, and we start creating something that usually is a superset, right? It's like, let's combine everything so everyone's happy, and we have no distinction anymore with anyone else, though. But everyone can join us. Well, then what do you really believe if you believe everything? Well, probably mostly nothing. So the Catholic Church, by the way, it's a universal church, supposed to be one church, and they're not one church. The last time I looked, I think there's like 14,000 different Christian denominations in the world. But their focus was, let's have control over what you believe. Why was it in Latin for so many centuries? It's control, right? I know Latin, you don't, so you have to believe, trust me, just trust me. You don't have to worry about it. So doctrine, governance, and state relationships. And that's what made the Catholic Church more protesting against, was more so some of the structure that they had in the control of Holy Roman Empire, the connection to the monarchs in Europe as well. It's problematic. So we had this structural hierarchical development over the 1st and 3rd century, where you start putting, moving from elders to more formal structured paid clergy and others as well over time, but all listening to the Pope, basically. And the Pope took more and more power on as well. So the single entity in the 2nd century, around AD 110, where we see that starting out of Antioch, actually, which is quite interesting. So it's not too long after Paul. Paul is dead by AD 110, not too after it. So it was a single bishop that said, I'm the person you should be looking to. So they started building out from there. We talked about the Gnostics. That's been mentioned a couple of times as well this week. But there started to be issues within or throughout the organization in many ways, going their own way, because there was no, well, I was going to say there's no glue. There was always glue. Christ is always the glue. God is always the glue. But there was no human glue anymore, at least we don't know of any. I mean, Paul was very much, through his journeys, very much a glue, and the letters, his letters and others' letters were very much the glue. But that seemed to disappear because we don't have much other evidence in it. And there was a legitimacy of teaching, apostolic, I know I'm not quite pronouncing that right, but sorry, a succession. So the bishops actually believed that they actually succeeded the apostles. And you even had those that believed they had the Holy Spirit and everything that was continued to be handed down potentially, or at least as they thought it was. So again, the Catholic, universal or according to the whole, again, Rome became the center of it. Why? It was the center of the empire, but also was, I'm not sure how much this is revisionary history, but Paul, Peter supposedly was martyred there. Paul, we know, was martyred there. You have St. Peter's Cathedral there, right, the home of in the Vatican. So we have this building out, and of course we know in Matthew 16 and 18 that it's upon, well, if we read it out of context, we think the cornerstone's Peter. It's not. It's that Christ lived and died and was resurrected for us. So then we have the edicts. I mentioned the edicts already, so I don't need to review these again. Just to remind you again, if you want the slides, I'm happy to. I don't have a place to post them. Maybe I can post them out when you guys post them. That may be the easiest thing to do, or I can email them to them. They are quite large, actually, so I'll talk to Brother Jim about that. And then the recognition by the state. The authority, political authority, and this, over Pope Leo I was responsible. I mean, they still have an army, the Swiss Guard, but it's not really an army. But they'd have armies, especially during the Holy Roman Empire. Stopped Attila the Hun, for example. And then there was this East-West divergence, and you have the Great Schism. You've probably heard of that. That was 1054, which was who's the authority. So now you have the Eastern Orthodox, which actually you have a couple authorities there because you have the Greek Orthodox and then you have the Russian Orthodox, and there's some others there as well. Some will recognize the Pope in Rome as their leader that can speak right to God, and others will recognize others or don't recognize any for that matter. I did not take this picture. It's a beautiful picture. I did not take that picture of St. Peter's. If you get a chance, it's incredible how much money was funneled back to the Roman Catholic Church over the decades. I have this thing that I blame certain cultures for certain things around the world. So the way it goes is, the French are blamed I blame them for Southeast Asia. I blame the British for the Middle East, because the way they carved up where all the countries were. I blame the Germans, the Italians, and the French for Africa and how they messed up things there. I blame the Catholic Church for South America, and I blame the U.S. for everything else. Right. But you look at history, we can learn from history, and we see what are these relationships and stuff. And South America, very Catholic-oriented, but very superstitious as a result of that. It's like in Italy, in northern Italy, they're all communists. Southern Italy, they're all Catholic. It's just really quite interesting, the contradiction between the two. Southern Italy is very poor. Northern Italy is actually quite well off because they actually believe in capitalism. So you see kind of this structure here and how kind of three major steps over time. So hindsight is 20/20, so we can look back at it. We can see these things taking place. But if you're in the middle of it, you're probably not going to see it. We're going to talk more about this tonight. As an ecclesia, we have to pay attention to what we measure, what we look for, and to make sure that we're fixing things before they become an issue as best we can. And then when we deal with issues, which we will, we're dealing with them as appropriately as possible. So again, Reformations, Martin Luther is a very well-known one. He did not really separate the church from state. Ultimately, it became the church mainly in Germany, for example. Pietism, 17, 18 centuries, with Philip Spener in Germany emphasized piety, moral living, direct personal experience. Usually most of these movements were actually really good to start with. And kind of back to some basics, The Methodist movement in the 18th century, John Wesley, you may have heard of him, and his brother Charles, movement in England, which originated within the Anglican Church and then spun out of it. The Anglican Church was founded so there could be divorce. That was the only difference, really. Still separated, like they don't still see the Pope, but they believe the same thing as the Roman Catholics. So they stressed, in the Methodist movement originally, stressed sanctification, social service, and evangelical outreach. And then the Great Awakening. So a series of religious revivals in the American colonies and North America emphasized passionate preaching and individual conversation. So we'll get more into this. And then more recently, the evangelical movement, the Pentecostal movement, that most people would say that came out of the Azusa Street revival in Los Angeles earlier I forget how many years ago now exactly that is, but I want to say in the 60s, but I might be wrong with that, so don't quote me on that. When I often talk to media and Wall Street people, I will be very careful, don't quote me on that. I think if I remember correctly. Protesters, you may know the book by Brother Alan Eyre. His focus was, is there a thread through the years, and I think there's very good evidence in his book that there are threads, and through history mainly, and he focused mainly on Unitarians, those that did not believe in the Trinity, and how there's pretty much that. I mentioned the Huguenots, you have the Mennonites, you have the Waldensians, there's many others out there, of course, in more modern day, Stelfians, Church of God, and so on. Early Unitarians, individuals, groups of churches opposed to the doctrine of the Trinity, medieval dissenters, groups persecuted by medieval church for practice or beliefs, so that Cathars would be one of those groups I mentioned earlier. Reformation, post-Reformation figures in the 16th century. So you have a set of those, and then kind of groups that were very similar to what we believe today that came out of that group, like even the Anabaptists at that time, anti-Trinity, and viewed the nature of man and the devil being the same. So there's, again, been many other groups. And then 18th, 19th centuries, you had pioneers like Brother John Thomas, who spent time in other churches as well before feeling that there was some other beliefs that had to go in. And I know it's mentioned earlier about, our statement of faith is very detailed in some things. I know the Church of God statement of faith is very detailed as well, of what we believe, mainly to make sure that other people know what we don't believe. But then, in the Christadelphian, we have, the doctrines be rejected. So there's three parts of the Birmingham Statement of Faith, right? There's because it's commandments of Christ as well. So there's three parts. You have what do you believe, what you don't believe, and commandments of Christ. And a lot of things, one of the things I was thinking about doing is doing the doctrines be rejected. So there's a book that Brother Peter Hemingway and I wrote through a bunch of articles that we wrote together, which started from a Sunday school class I gave in Ann Arbor some years ago. Because a lot of them are like, where did that come from? Some of them don't make any sense today, but there are foundations out of it. But it was really, again, to say what we don't believe, for good or for bad. But it was about drawing lines. Now, there is a precedence for that, right? 10 Commandments, right? What you believe and what you should not, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So there is a precedence for that. So we get into this restoration movement, looking back to what they would call the primitive church. So emerging from religious fervor into Second Awakening. So this is from about the 1790s to the 1840s or so. Unified Christ by abandoning man-made creeds. Leaders aim to return to primitive Christianity using the New Testament as their sole authority. Now, I think for our groups, it's not just the New Testament. It's also the Old Testament. It's the Scriptures. So that Great Awakening. And you have figures like Stone and Campbell that were very instrumental in this as well in the early periods of time. And you see the Stone-Campbell merger, where you have coming out of that the disciples of Christ. And someone can correct me on this because I'm not sure. I think the Campbellites, that's what they became, was preferred name. Instead of like the Christadelphians, instead of being called Thomasites, called Christadelphians, I think the Campbellites became disciples of Christ. Does anyone happen to know that here? Okay.
Campbell had a fit and somebody wanted to call it after him.
Yeah. Well, and I know supposedly Brother Thomas didn't like that either, which makes sense, right? It's not their church, it's God's church. So then you have these core principles, right? Back to basics, back to the Scriptures. No creeds, but Christ's creeds. And then the practices to be similar to during the times of the apostles. So again, the two awakenings, kind of early to mid 1700s was the first Great Awakening, and then you have the second Great Awakening, which is what our focus is. You have reshaping American Protestantism. Again, this is where we come, Christadelphians, Church of God of Abrahamic Faith, and other restorationists actually come out and have their roots from it. It was really going, as I said, emerged as a reaction against skepticism of the Enlightenment and the response to low church attendance. It's really trying to lift up everyone again. And I don't remember who I was talking with already this morning, but about, maybe it was Brother Jonathan, about, the Midwest at this time, that's where a lot of most of the population was east of the Mississippi in the 1800s, if not almost, significant portion, probably 95% or something. And you didn't have TV, right? You didn't have radios, and most of American settlers would have some religious background, and it was pretty fundamental.
1776, 250 years ago now. Right?
Yeah.
Less than 25% of the American population attended a church.
In 1776, less than 25% attended church. But I would think that most of them know again, and of course, America was founded on the principles of "in God we trust." It's still not our money, but money. Most people trust in the money more than that.
They didn't go to churches.
They didn't go to churches. Yeah, so they, family groupings and other things. So the Bible was probably, my understanding, was pretty widely held. So what did you do on a Saturday night? Right, you got together, and then these preachers would go around like Campbell and Thomas and others, and you go listen to them. We kind of missed that to some extent. It's that's when you would get up on your soapbox and go speak for a while. So the expansion was pretty significant. Again, early awakening. That's where like the Mormons would come out of the earlier awakening, as an example. Starting in New York and then moving was in Illinois, and then obviously finally out to Salt Lake City area. So this restoration movement. So we got Disciples of Christ, Churches of Christ as well, Christadelphians, Church of God of Abraham of Faith, just to name a few. And then Mormonism, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. So here's those individuals here, some of the key individuals. Walter Scott, who baptized Brother Thomas at one point as well. So sought to, again, abandon human-made creeds and doctrines and traditions, so practices and principles, restoring original beliefs and practices of the first century, and very heavily influenced the landscape in America, especially in the Midwest. And I think further beyond that. So a little bit history of some of these individuals. You have Stone, born in 1772 through 1844, Presbyterian in Kentucky, organized the Cane Ridge Revival of 1801. 10 to 20,000 people are supposedly gathered at that revival. we need a revival like that. That's impressive. Emphasize unity and insisted on calling themselves simply Christians to discard any denominational tags. Campbell, so Thomas Campbell and Alexander Campbell, living from the mid to late 1700s to the mid 1800s. Thomas Campbell was a Presbyterian minister and issued what's called the Declaration and an Address of 1809, which considered the movement's fundamental doctrine. Again, Campbellites is in quotes there, but he became the disciples of Christ. And then Benjamin Wilson, which I think most of us would know of, he created the epiphatic diaglot, which Christadelphians use. He was a co-founder of the Church of God Abrahamic Faith. And the connection, because both he and Brother Thomas were members of the Disciples of Christ, or the Campbellite movement. And that's why we still interact with each other, because basically have exactly the same roots and same belief structure. So some core principles, again, getting back to basics. Especially New Testament, the whole Bible, especially New Testament, sole rule of faith and practice. Where the scriptures speak, we speak. This is quoting them. Where the scriptures are silent, we are silent. Like Brother Gord this morning says, just because it's not there doesn't mean it's not important. Just because, so we have to obviously be careful about that and say, well, if I've heard this sometimes, brethren will say, well, if they were, I actually hear at times where they'll say, the Birmingham Statement of Faith was good enough for Paul, it's good enough for us. I've heard that. Okay? It's quite a bit simpler than that when it comes down to it. Rejection of creeds, again, no creed but Christ, no book but the Bible. Christians only, but not only Christians. So how do we reach out to those that are beyond the Christian faith and bring them into the Christian faith? This is really interesting. I came across this. I was somewhat aware of the movement, of course, but I didn't realize how impactful it was to places like Ohio. And the fact that in Ohio, there's a historical marker of this in Oxford Township. I looked it up, and I don't remember if it was just outside of Columbus or outside, I think it's like northwest of Columbus, maybe. Does that sound right? Okay, so I'm going to blow this up. So in the early years of the 19th century, a religious unrest known as it's interesting, unrest sounds like it was fighting, but didn't seem to be any fighting. The Second Great Awakening spread across much of the American frontier. So again, Ohio was the frontier at that time. Right? Indiana and Illinois would be even more of the frontier. Among the influential of the evolving religious organizations were the Campbellites, or the Disciples of Christ, founded in the 1820s by Thomas and Alexander Campbell. The Campbellite movement sought to restore the New Testament Christianity by calling for a return to their primitive church revealed in the Gospels. Campbellites denied creeds and oath-taking and rejected sectarianism, and they believed in baptism by immersion and communion on Sundays. Followers also dealt with the problems and transgressions of their members within the church and did not use civil courts. They held a millennial view that professed human happiness and the belief that Christ would reign on earth for 1,000 years. Believers spread this word to the pioneers of the Dottie settlement, which I didn't look that up. I've heard of it before. I didn't look it up. And elsewhere, by 1850, there were 90 Campbellite churches in Ohio alone. Now, again, some of these may have been very small, family-based ones, but this was a plaque put in 2005 in Oxford Township, Ohio. So people do pay attention to those things. So the ecclesial model, now we'll talk a little bit about this. Again, decentralized, right? Lay ministers, no hierarchy. These are things that were set up. The responsibility of the ecclesia, of the people, are the people, right? And there's twofold objectives. There's the edification and the testimony, right? It's the building up one another and providing testament to others that are on the outside. We have the memorial meeting, which kind of refocuses our attention. We make sure that we don't forget what we're there for to begin with, which is and what we've been blessed with Christ's life, death, and resurrection. There is an order. We have order to some extent. We have to obey God, but we also have, and this is interesting, I'll read a couple of things on this. So there's order, principles, and then there's practice, which there's freedom in. So there's a balance between, and we know this we should know this as individuals as well. Certain things we need to do, but how we do things can be different. So it's true in the ecclesia as well, that there's principles that should better be followed, or commanded to be followed, and then there's practices that we have different ways we can do that. So there's this balance between this. And by the way, Brother Roberts wrote about this in the Ecclesial Guide, and I'll show you that. So how do we get here? This is just one perspective, right? This is now going to take on a Christadelphian or Christadelphia perspective here of how do you grow an organization and have a structure to it so it's as consistent as necessary. And it goes back to Brother Gord about necessary. So is everything necessary to be exactly the same? Absolutely not, right? But there is a core component to it that allows us to be seen as part of the body of Christ. So there's so here the structure emphasizes the equality of all baptized members. Brothers and sisters are the same in Christ, and there's no hierarchy, as we know, no paid clergy, lay ministers, and so on. All right, so we have a basic unit is the ecclesial unit, or the church, right, where we have the elders, and then we work with and help each other. We have no hierarchy, the lay leadership. I think that's one of the smartest things. I know early on, Church of God had ministers, and some of you are related to some of those ministers back in the day, and there's probably wonderful times, but also I think you would probably say that as more people get involved, the healthier some of the churches became to an extent, because it really forces us as individuals to take on more learning ourselves. But I know some of you, I think Brother Mark, your dad was a minister, if I remember correctly. No, he wasn't? Okay, I was thinking about someone else then. I know there was a Christadelphian actually went to Church of God, Abraham of Faith in Cleveland, that then became your minister. But yeah, and if I remember, I mean, there's been no ministers within your organization for decades now. So I don't know if you would agree. You don't have to say anything to me now, but if you agree, if it's better or worse, you think about it. In some ecclesias, in Christadelphia, we have ministers, or at least those that seem to act like it. So, all right, service, right? Main service here. We have the focus of the service about remembering Christ's life, death, and resurrection. Practice is for baptized members then to share the bread and wine. Exhortation, the sermon, again following as we've already gone through the kind of the structure of the synagogues, and we're commanded in Hebrews 3 and 13, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. So we are to work with each other. This is not just on Sunday, by the way. It's not just through the sermon or the exhortation, but we are to exhort each other, right? How do we help each other if we're not talking to each other and communicating in a spiritual way? So share principles, but practices can be different, as I've already mentioned. Then we have other structures. Bible classes are pretty typical, most times usually midweek. We have wonderful opportunity now to connect to so many different ecclesial functions, not just physically, but virtually. It's just, how many you can spend time connecting. Some of our brethren in California will connect to ones in the East Coast, and some I know in our area will connect things in England and stuff, or Africa and so on. Not just on Sunday, but also during the week as well. I've been able to, the brother in India that does the one on Friday mornings, that a lot of people connect to throughout the world. I got a chance to meet him a couple of times in India. He's in the Hyderabad area. But we are really blessed with what we have, and we need to use it more. Public lectures aren't as common as they used to be. And sometimes that has to change because people aren't coming out to them anymore. So what else can we do to get people, right? So in some ways, I would like to do more lectures. In other ways, if they're not preaching enough, maybe there's other mechanisms that we can do that. Sunday school, that was been already mentioned, and Bible schools, something that started in the I want to remember saying it was the early 60s or late 50s when Bible school started, because you had 50 years of the Kogath gathering. I think Hanover, was in the 50s. Hanover was pretty early, and then was the one in New England, if I remember correctly. Wilbraham was some of the earlier ones. But it's really, how do you build faith, and how do you build the community, right? You bring people together to go do that. Mutual admonition, again, back and forth. Hey, you're not doing this, or you're doing this. And it should be positive and negative. It's not always should be just negative. We have opportunities to volunteer, to do work, to support each other, and then the disciple and discipline. So being disciples requires some discipline, so that we have a set of core beliefs, actually fairly simple when you think about it. Not as complicated as the statement of faith makes it out to be at times, but even that's pretty simple. By the way, when we do baptismal interviews, we always talk to the individual ahead of time, say, this is a conversation, not a test. Ann Arbor's been very clear about that. We won't announce it until after the conversation. I know we have Ecclesia, I don't know if they still do this, but the interview is in front of the whole community, the whole congregation. Talk about scary, that's scary. But we always say, this is a discussion. We just want to have a discussion with you to see what your thinking is, really. And it shouldn't be more than that. I think, the fear part, you should be, how should I say this? Respectful of it, right? It is a very important decision that we make in our lives, but we should not fear it. But it's hard sometimes for people to, especially young people, to understand the difference between fearing something and respecting something. So again, focus on continuous Bible study, preaching are foundational in all this. And in the guide, there's some really interesting things that Robert Roberts put in the guide. Now he has background now, he was a convert, but he believed in order, kind of a British thing as well. So how do we do church today? Has a lot to do with the guide. So in the guide it reads, in the guide to the formation of conduct of Christadelphian ecclesias, in the characteristic circumstances of age when the truth has a positive, I can't say that word, apostolically, thank you, apostolically delivered has been revived in the way of divine providence without the cooperation and living guidance of the Holy Spirit is enjoyed in the let's see, I'm going to say that again, wrong again. Say it, someone help me. Apostolic. See, I can't start it, that's the problem. Apostolic, thank you. We are provided details on how to organize and run an ecclesia. So that was the purpose of the guide. And it's a guide, remember that. That's very important. So to help in the development and give scope of the exercise of this faithfulness, obedient believers were required to form themselves into communities. We've talked about that already, all the way back to the earliest Jewish communities as well in the synagogues. In the New Testament, we know it's called ecclesias. There's no exact equivalence in English, which I disagree with, but he does continue to say here that it's the called out ones. So in the section under this section called the objects of ecclesial work, Brother Roberts writes the edification or refinement, encouragement, strengthening, or building up of its individuals constituents in the faith and edifying of itself in love. Pretty good summary, right, of Ephesians, as we know, Ephesians 4 and 16, right? And we've already read this morning, so I'll move on. And then the exhibition of the light of truth to those that are without. Now, it's nothing new, right? It's inside and internally and external. Twofold, the ecclesia's pillar, right, stands up on those truths, as we know from 1 Timothy. But if I tarry long, that thou mayest know how thou oughtest to behave thyself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. Right? So our foundation is there, so edification. So in Robert Roberts' the guide, it says, more agreeable, but the testimony of the truth is equally as dutiful function. We must therefore resist a tendency to exalt the former testimony, right, over the latter, and at the same time be equally or on guard that we pursue no latter to the sacrifice of the former. So edification and testimony. Right, both important and both need to be balanced, as he says. There's tendency for a young ecclesia to give public testimony the more prominent place, and older bodies perhaps a tendency to prefer that which is individually profitable to that which may seem to them to be a fruitless exhibition of divine matters to a heedless public. A right condition of things gives both an equal place. Duty to Christ will sustain older ecclesias in a course from which their original preferences would withdraw them, and the need of comfort and the luxury and service of worship will help the younger bodies to give due place to breaking of bread and exhortation. So a balance between internal and external activities, and a balance between strengthening from within and seeking strength from outside. I don't think I've ever read the guide from cover to cover, and when I was looking at this, I'm not sure if I ever heard this before, but it's so true. It's this balance that we have to have within any family, and certainly ecclesial family. And it's not just one or the other. It's not just about preaching, and it's not just about internal things. It's really a balance between the two. So balance is quite critical. So in the section rules and modes, so there must be order and mutual submission. Submission is something that we often forget about as well. We are instruction scriptures to submit, and Brother Gordon mentioned again, mentioned yesterday also about the Jerusalem conference. They were asked to submit, and of course, as he mentioned also, that didn't quite happen. It's hard for us to agree with something we don't agree with, but if it's not a first principle, why do we care? If it's a practice, do we really care? Principle, core principle, first principles. Again, I'm not going to define all the first principles. It's really not as many as we think, right? But that's what matters. Beyond that, how we do things. Okay, you may not be comfortable doing that, so you may have to go somewhere else. But do you really? It's something we have to think about. So again, combination of order and individual liberty says both are essential to the healthy and harmonious life of an ecclesia. The danger is that one or other may be sacrificed in the endeavor to secure either. Care should be taken that neither is secured at the expense of the other. Let not order quench individual liberty, and be sure that individual liberty is not allowed to destroy order. Reason why I'm focusing on this is because tonight I'm going to talk a lot about this and why churches die, and a lot of them die because of exactly this point. And we can probably have some churches and ecclesias that we know of that died for these types of things. All right, and under necessities of the present situation, he says little or no government should be necessary, so government, ecclesial control. Were all who profess the name of Christ animated by a controlling difference to the mind of Christ, a mind swayed by both the love of God and the love of man. Now, I pray that that's true. It's not, generally speaking, so we have to have some elders or whatever to support things. But his point is really well taken, right? If we have true love for one another, from God and of man, then everything should take care of itself. But we lack that at times. Individuals especially lack that, and ecclesias can lack that as well. So in the mixed state of things prevailing at present, arrangement and order are necessary. So he says, hey, if everything was perfect and we loved God and we loved man equally and everyone did that, we wouldn't need any order, would be natural. But we don't have that. So that was his argument for having more of a structure in the ecclesial guide. And I think it is done well to provide a foundation. Again, a guide that is used as it should be, hopefully, but sometimes not, sometimes overdone. But the guide always refers back to scriptures. So you should go back to the scriptures. If you question the guide, don't question the guide, study the scriptures and understand that what it was. And certainly this time in the 1800s, you had the British Empire, and he was able to travel, as we know, very far around the world, and bringing this kind of structure that allowed the sustaining. So one of the things, Brother Bruce has stepped out, he's probably teaching right now, but he mentioned to me after class yesterday is, I talked about the preaching, converting, sustaining, and he said practicing Jesus. And that, to me, that's part of sustaining, right? We have to practice what we preach. If we just preach and we don't practice, then we're not going to sustain ourselves, let alone anyone else. So think about this. Why is this? Why the community has seen growth? Our growth has not grown as fast as the community around us. And I'm asking you this to think about this because tonight we're going to talk more about this. But I think this is a challenge we should challenge ourselves and our elders. Why aren't we growing? Now, some ecclesias have done pretty well to gain their, baptize them from their own Sunday school, but done not so good from the outside. Some have not done very well even from their own Sunday school, for that matter. And so our community in North America is not much bigger than it has been ever. England is shrinking, except for the fact that a lot of Iranian brothers and sisters are coming there. They're aging out for various reasons, which I won't comment on. But Europe, there's very few ecclesias in Europe. Now, again, Africa is growing. It's needed there, but there's a lot of focus there as well. The Caribbean and other places where there's focus tends to be more preaching going on. India is another place where it's growing. So we have this, the global ecclesia we've been blessed with. So this will follow with a bunch of slides of churches and ecclesias, by the way, CGF and Christadelphian ecclesias. You may recognize yourself in some of them. Some of them are going to be old, so you may go, whoa, that was a long time ago. Again, I pulled these from my dad's slides and some of my stuff as well, because I'm pretty much right out of time now, so we're now going into the break period. So if you want to get up and get some, you're more than welcome to do that. But we do have a global community. and we've inherited this ability. We have been blessed with this, and it's our responsibility. We don't own the Ecclesia. We don't own our buildings. We may own them, but you know what I mean. We've been blessed with the opportunity to have a lamp, and Lord willing, continue to have the oil and continue to feed the oil into the lamp. So if you just look kind of in the upper left corner, one out of the 4 is the Detroit area. We've been blessed. There's 4 ecclesias there now. There's a couple of other individual people that are there. I think there's still, might be some Bereans still there actually, and a few unamended perhaps, but I think they've all died out or moved away. It was an unamended ecclesia that had been in Flint and actually ended up joining our ecclesia some years ago. Then you go zoom out to kind of the upper Midwest, I should say, and then lower left, obviously most of the U.S., but not California, and then kind of move out to the whole North America. This is a kind of difference between people that meet in halls versus meet in homes. Now, I should have added one. There's one in Windsor now that meets once a month on a Saturday, so that people from Detroit area and from Toronto and stuff in London can come down and support it. There's a number of refugee families there. I know there's an Iranian family, and then there's 2 from Africa, if I remember correctly. I haven't, unfortunately, been a chance. Mom, you went. Do you remember? You went. Or Shirley, you might remember. You've been there as well. I think there's a couple of African families there as well. They've been put there by the British government, excuse me, the Canadian government, because it's cheaper to live down in Windsor, for example, than up in Toronto.
And they can't cross the border.
But they're not, good point. Yeah, they're not allowed to cross the border. They don't have any kind of documentation. There's one family that's been there longer, that some of the kids have documentation now. So actually the CYCs in Detroit will go over there and support them as well. But that's been a blessing that in Ann Arbor and the other ecclesias have supported in that area. And then I got this picture some years ago, my brother, I don't remember exactly who, so this may be somewhat out of date, but kind of light stands that we would recognize in our community around the world. And there's a lot out there, but usually a fairly small size overall. And then you probably recognize this place, Peter, but again, this is a few years ago. But this is the ecclesia. Now, to be fair, or to be honest about it, I do have a few pictures of buildings. My intent was to get all the ecclesias, and all the people, the congregations. So LA Hall, so I was a member of LA for a period of time, still get out there every so often. The LA Ecclesia, unfortunately, has shrunk quite a bit over the years. At one point, I think when we first got there in the late 80s, it was about 100 members, brothers and sisters. When I say members, I'm saying baptized members, and probably had 20, 30 children. And now, I don't know, Brother Jim, you may have an update, but I'm thinking it's like 20-something or so, something like that. So we can go into cycles, but if we're not continuing to preach, we're going to probably go down and go to the point where we may not be able to even afford where we're at. Now, I'm pretty sure they own the hall. Hall's probably worth a lot of money. There's a location well, Southern California is not cheap no matter where you are. This is an older picture my dad took of the Santa Barbara Ecclesia. Again, I don't know the current state of that, but they have a hall, as you can see. We have Simi Hills, which this is the back, but before the cover was put on. So this is some years ago, I'm sure. Because I'm not sure when the cover was put on, but I know there's a cover in the back now. And then, by the way, there's a railroad behind that, and behind that there's a film studio lot. Did you ever hear that on a Sunday? Did they ever film on the Sunday? Not usually. But during the school, yeah. Do they complain about you guys making too much noise? Well, they got the railroad going through every so often.
Did you notice the difference in the children in these different places? A lot of these have been older members.
Yeah, and in Simi, that's a great point. And you'll see this in a lot of the English ones that tend to be older. And in Simi, you've done a great job, clearly. And the school may have helped that as well. Kind of attract more families with kids as well. And I'm sure there's kids going to school there that are not parents, Christadelphian parents as well. I'm assuming there was a few. I know some other places they have that opportunity. So this is the first time I visited the Bangalore Ecclesia. At that point there was one Bangalore Ecclesia. Now there's 2. One meets in homes, I believe. And then there's this one. This was originally where the Australian mission was located. But already by this time, the ecclesia was running itself. It wasn't being run through the mission. And I'll show you a picture a little bit later of 2022. Last time I was there was in April, this past April, actually. And that's when I saw Bruce and Joni last. So I only run into them in India, because then it was it was 2022 or 2023 time before that. Here's a picture of the Pittsburgh Ecclesia. Again, a couple of young people, but mostly more elderly. This I cannot find which ecclesia in England this is. This one was a decent amount of young people, actually, which was a bit surprising. Yeah, this is one of Dad's pictures, yeah. That's one reason why I don't know where it is. Now, this is a brother in Moscow. I went to Moscow and St. Petersburg on one of my trips, and I asked a sister that was in Ann Arbor at the time, who's now in Prague, where should I go? Because I know there's Christadelphians in both places, or historically, for some time there's been. He said, well, go, and here's a brother in Moscow because he speaks English. You go to St. Petersburg, no one speaks English, and you're just not going to be able to get along. So I met with him and it was his girlfriend. I don't remember either a name. Just to put your position, so to the back right corner, if you go through that building, or there's an arch there, that's the Red Square. So you're right, pretty much you're right next to the Kremlin here, actually. And so they took me out for the day and told me stories about different things that were going on in the community and stuff, and which I'll do privately, I won't do on stage, but some negative things, a lot of good things as well, but really had an enjoyable time there. This is the Seoul Ecclesia when I met with them, and this is where I exhorted, and I should have worn my full suit. And you can see how hot they even look in this. So the recording brother at the time was this brother, who is an Australian brother. So where do I run into him again? He was giving a weekend in the Hyderabad Ecclesia in India a year ago, and I happened to go there that day. So you never know. And I try to remember, this sister actually translated my exhortation, because he said, I can translate it, but it's going to be really painful for people to listen to. She's much better. Like, fine with me. This one, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the ecclesia. This is the Esslingen Ecclesia outside of Stuttgart, to the east of Stuttgart. This is it's like Christadelphian community, I think the German is. If you can read this, you'll know better than me. But they are kind of position themselves as a Christian community, but associated with the Christadelphians. It's a study weekend, which I could not figure out where it was by the people. Obviously in the spring sometime. So then we have the Washington, D.C. Ecclesia that meets in Adelphi. Few young people, but again, mostly middle age or older. This is in the back. We got to Enfield too late, so we had to sit in the way back. My son and I, when we visited there, we were with, the Gore family in Michigan. So we were staying with John Gore's parents. Yes, we were staying with John Gore's parents, John and I. We got there a little late, but it was good. Boston or Stoughton, Massachusetts Ecclesia. Again, this may have been I don't know, in England it's practiced that during memorial service, the children have Sunday school at the same time. So sometimes my father's picture. I don't think they do that in Boston, but in some ecclesias in Europe, that's the case. So I'll just let you know, it's a quarter after. Again, you'll have 15 more minutes, but we're not quite done yet. So again, if you have to get up, please, will not be offended by that at all. I believe this is Rocky Mountain. I don't know the year. Again, you're going to see more children here, of course, but I'm pretty sure this is Rocky Mountain, because it looks like it would be. And I think Mom and Dad are probably in this picture somewhere. Yeah, they are, right over here. So this is one of many times I've been to Beijing in the ecclesia there. Stephen Cox, does anyone know that name? So there's Stephen. He lived there for about 20 years. So this is Sister Ginny and a young Sister Mary. Well, she was not a sister yet. She's the one who translated this day, or the day before. This is that we got together on, I think it was the Saturday, and the day after on the Sunday. They said, she's the best translator here. She went to an English school and spoke fluent English and fluent Mandarin. And I'm like, as you guys are happy with her exhorting, well, translating my exhortation, I should say, then I'm 100% fine with that. She ended up going to school at the University of Michigan. COVID happened. We worked with her many times. She came to the meeting and everything. Then she went up to the University of Waterloo, and during late COVID, stayed with the Bro cause for a period of time. And unfortunately, she's kind of lost touch. Maybe I'll talk to some of you that are from Cambridge and stuff, and maybe we do another reach out to her. Wonderful young sister. She went up there to do a PhD. She ended up just doing a master's, but she's working for, I think, her PhD advisor. And still up in the Waterloo area. Very intelligent woman, but she sent me a note how happy she was because she found a set of Christian Chinese church. And it was not Cambridge, it was not Kitchener-Waterloo or anything, unfortunately. So this is now me back, you recognize the thing. This is back in 2022. And some of the young gentlemen are like, oh, that, and they looked at the other picture. I showed them the other picture, like, oh boy, I was young. I said, well, it's like 20, almost 20 years ago. It's 19 years difference. Now, this is a bigger ecclesia than this, but this is, I don't remember if this was after, this may have been after lunch. And this is a day when my colleague came with me and wanted to see what it was all about. So, now this is an interesting couple, Iranian couple. They were in Southeast Iran, both educated, both met in college, both. I forget exactly now what they are, architects, urban architects. Really nice couple. They were told by Brother Galbraith one night, you need to leave, because part of the ecclesia was being taken into custody and stuff. So they left. They left everything. And they went to Turkey, because if you're Iranian, you can either go to Turkey or Sri Lanka without a visa. That's like the only two places. Spent a year there. They said it was horrible. They wouldn't talk about it. They ended up getting asylum in Germany and Hamburg to begin with, because her uncle had been in Hamburg for some years. And they went there kind of early on, so 10 plus years ago now, 15 years ago, and got a lot of support from the German government. Both learned German and everything. Unfortunately, Western ideals came into their lives, and they're divorced. Now I've seen he's neither one of them are going to the ecclesia anymore. Now he ended up getting a master's. He went down to Stuttgart and did attend Esslingen for a period of time. But again, there's some other history there I won't go into. I did have seen him since he left. I said, I've not left the truth, but I've left the ecclesia. But again, other issues I won't get into. But think about this: you're a young couple, and you're called one night, and you leave. I mean, they did, and he wrote up the thing. What they went through is something, and unfortunately, I'm surprised, because they went through so much, and when they just, it's unfortunate. You get sucked into other things, but if they can go through that, they could have gone through what they went through, but I won't comment any more than that. Here's another picture. This is in 2019 in Beijing. They go up and down in size. There's another picture I have of them. Taipei Ecclesia, interesting little side bit here. So this sister learned the truth from what I called Uncle Smitty. This is a brother I guess were they still in Jamaica at the time? African-American, brother that I called uncle, because that ecclesia was almost all African-American, and he was my uncle, like any uncles and aunts and stuff. So she said, I learned from him. I said, I call him uncle. She was shocked, because I'm meeting this person now in Taipei. And by the way, so I look at the ALS diary when I'm traveling, and I want to see if there's an ecclesia somewhere. And then they said, contact the Australian Mission. So to me, that means they don't speak English. Well, it turns out they do. And turns out the ecclesia where they met was in one of the sisters, I believe it was this sister's kind of apartment that was turned into ecclesial meeting space, because her father was a pastor. And he didn't agree with it, so she kicked him out. So, so long story short, I get this note from someone, and later that week I'm teaching Bible class. Again, I've been there a couple of times since then. I get emails from every so often of baptisms and other things. Johannesburg Ecclesial Hall at the time, I think they're meeting in, is it Mickey's house, Brother Skeeper's house nowadays, I believe. Is that? Do you know if you guys know that's still true? In Joburg, are they meeting at Brother Mickey's house? Not sure. I think Matt told me that at one point. So this is the Queen's Ecclesia. This is where Dad grew up. So Dad is here. Now, this is the time where you dressed sharp. Now, Dad was dressed by his grandfather, Brother Angelo, right here, who was a tailor. So he got a new suit every year, Dad did, probably because offcuts and everything, and he was growing every year. So this back here is Ellen Stiles, or Ellen Forsythe. So Don's wife, Sister Ellen. So Dad grew up in the Sunday school. She's was a few years older. And her sister is the mother, and then her sister is probably here somewhere as well. And then the Jans, people in Seattle. What's that? Oh, she was already married? Yeah. No. So my grandfather found the truth because of a pamphlet given to him on a train. read it in Italian, and then tried to find that same person, finally found that same person sometime later on the subway train, and went to the Italian-speaking church in New York City. At one time there was a German one, Italian one, English one, and so on. And he decided, well, he got ill, and he's like, well, my oldest grandson's going to take me to church. And so Dad went to church with him, and he says, well, to do that, we're going to go to the English-speaking church because I want my grandkids, at least. And of course, after that, finally, is my father's mother got baptized, and then my father's father, many years later, got baptized. So he planted the seed, and God watered it, and other people watered it. I believe this is a picture of Manuka. I have another one, which I think is definitely Manuka. I believe this one is because I'm in this picture, and I know I went to Manuka around this time. And then study weekend, you guys will recognize definitely people here. Brother Russ is in here, Brother Norm is in here, so this is probably something, could this have been in Bloomington or down in Champaign maybe? I don't remember. I don't know, let's put it that way. Here's the Shanghai Ecclesia. One time I met with them. I've seen them a few times over the years. You can see I look a lot younger than I'm sure I was. Here's a baptism. This is at the Holiday Inn I used to stay at in Taipei a lot, and that's where they would do their baptisms. I think this one may be Manuka as well. I'm not sure, because I see Paul Sharp, Nancy Sharp here in the middle, so it's probably Manuka. It's not Idlewild. Old Baltimore Ecclesia. That's definitely an old picture, because I'm looking like I'm like 12, 13 or so something like that. Road River, obviously 96. That one's easy. We know when that was done. Old Bucks County. Bucks County closed some years ago and merged with Morristown, which is now called. They moved. They bought a new hall the hall that they were in Morristown for decades was the elementary school of Dottie's father. They had bought many years ago, but they outgrew it a long time ago. And they have a bunch of refugee families there and everything, so they bought a hall fairly recently, but the name has changed, just a little east of where they were in Morristown. And that's Andy, that's my older brother. So again, he's a teenager here. So this is some years ago. So this is when I met with people in Beijing in 2024. They said, you have a place to meet. I'm like, hold on. I go up to the front desk. This is at a Marriott, JW Marriott probably, where my conference was being held. And I said, I come here a lot in a certain level in Marriott points. Can you give me a suite? So they did. So we met in the suite then. So I was blessed of that. Westfield, South Africa Hall, you guys probably recognize that a little bit, but I just took this because, again, the scripture is what ties us together. And of course, in that hall in the back, you probably stayed in the back, right? They have all apartments and stuff. There was one brother there from Germany, if I remember correctly, that lived there for a long time. He's now fallen asleep. But then there was a bunch of things, places in the back where people stay, and you can tell people all about all the work that goes on down there. And I do have the Beck in Durban, which that's familiar to you as well. I got to talk to people at the back there, and went by the Durban Hall. Was not there on a Sunday, so that's why there's no people there. And then I had a really interesting time. My son and I got a tour of the original, the first school, and this is in Adelaide. It's a school. I mean, they bought a school, and it's just fabulous what they have there. And then in Auckland. One time I mentioned to someone in Detroit, I said, oh yeah, I was in Auckland. Oh, did you go to meeting? Of course I went to meeting. I spoke. You spoke? I'm like, yeah, they asked me, I'll speak, it's fine. I have a habit like my dad did, is you always bring an exhortation with you. You just never know. Because then, again, South Africa, she would be much better talking all the details here, but I did visit. One day Matt takes me said, oh, by the way, I didn't tell you, but you can do an exhortation there, and then you're gonna do a talk there, and then you're gonna do a Bible class there. I'm like, okay. But that's probably what Matt and you guys did all the time, right? But going through the creches and everything was quite interesting. Here's a San Francisco Peninsula Ecclesia at some point in the past. I see the Sleepers there and some others that you probably recognize. I'm just about done here. Here's Forest Hill Ecclesia, southeast London. This was an old dance hall they bought many years ago. And that's Bomb Alley. This is where the bombers would come over from Germany, would come up to London from the southeast, and this area got pretty decimated during the war. Oxford Ecclesia, Dad and Mom spent quite a bit of time there. I'd been there a couple of times, but he spent some sabbaticals. What's that? No, well, we remember. And then the last picture, Schooley Mountain. Growing up in New York, we had a lot of interaction with all the ecclesias around us, including the unamended ecclesias, and I have a lot of fond memories and stories about going in the woods with the Primeranos and the Di Libertos and some of the other ones of my age. So I'm sorry, I know I ran way over, but I know people got up and down, but we'll give you another 5 minutes, or whenever Jim decides to start, we'll start the next one. Thank you. Thank you for being so patient.